welcome to Navigating the Four podcast, where we discuss all things faith, healing, leadership, and communication. Exploring the topic of communication, I'm Matt Barker, and I'm joined by the other hosts of the podcast. Tackling the topic of faith, we have Freed Hardeman Professor of Bible, Matt Cook.
Hey guys, glad to be here.
Exploring the perspective of leadership, we have Assistant Dean of Emerging and Innovative Programs at Freed Hardeman, Mr. Jared Gott.
Hello.
Otherwise known as Muffin. Sorry, had to do that. And exploring all things mental health, we have Director of the University Counseling Center at Freed Hardeman, Mr. Nathan Judd.
Hello.
Yep. And as always, thanks for joining us for this episode of Navigating the Four, where we bring you real talk, fresh perspectives, and a few laughs along the way. Whether you're in the middle of figuring life out or just here for some good conversation, you're in the right place. So grab a seat, maybe a cup of coffee, and let's start navigating the four together. All right, today's episode will focus on the topic of mental health. So I'm going to hand it over to our in-house counselor, Nathan Judd.
I love that intro music, man. Every time I hear it, I'm just like jamming. I love being
It is
awkward.
good music, though.
Yeah, I love being awkward. We all picked out some topics for each of us in our given area, and I'm in mental health, and I've found myself in a niche.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure,
One of
whatever.
them. Yeah. You're the communication guy, Matt. You pick.
I don't know.
Okay.
Now, the key, you know what the key is? The key is saying it confidently and nobody knows the difference.
Okay, that's right.
Like those big words in the Bible, like if
too
you're
late.
reading them, just act like you know what it
Yeah.
is, and nobody be like, oh, that's how you say that.
It's too late, man.
Nike.
He's already let his guard down.
So I've found myself in a niche of working in the field of trauma. It's been a cool road to get there. So we're going to talk about trauma today. And I know we all hear the word trauma, and we did a little bit of pre-brief before the episode, just kind of getting a feel for where this episode's going. And I'm actually really excited because I think some of the questions that my co-hosts have about this are probably questions that people outside of the realm of mental health or just anywhere have about it. So I like the freedom to ask some questions about it. But anyway, we're going to unpack what trauma is, how it impacts us today. So as we start, when you hear the word trauma, what do you think about? And we can go in any order. I don't really care what order
Matt,
we go
why
in.
don't you go first?
Yeah, Matt.
When I hear the word trauma, I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is something that's impacted me in a way that changes the way I look at things, I guess. Like you hear someone say, I've had a traumatic event. When you come across that event in the future, you're impacted in some way. So there's some sort of trauma there. I think a lot of times we think of like something when I hear the word trauma, you think, oh, something terrible has happened. So that there's a negative maybe connotation to the word trauma. Maybe you think, maybe it's something like something that was injured or hurt. You had a traumatic injury, like someone that's in the athletics, they broke their leg. That's a traumatic injury. So you hear the word and you think of a negative connotation, but really, I guess, boiling it down, trauma would just be something that impacts your life in a way that changes the way you look at things in the future. I guess maybe would be a oversimplistic way of defining that word maybe. So that's what I think about.
I think I typically associate it with the negative connotation too, right? I think, and I really don't know what the opposite would be.
I
like
was going to say, I don't know that.
Transformative. I mean, but that describes trauma in and of itself.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But I do think I agree with everything you just said, Matt, but I think adding on to it, it's something that lingers or stays with you, whether you realize it or not. And I think maybe that's just an add-on to that definition.
Yeah, I think just listening to you guys describe this, I thought of something. I was like, oh, I forgot about that trauma. I was like, something that impacts like a big, I guess in this case, it was a big thing that happened. I was like, oh man, that was trauma and that impacts us today. So yeah, big negative things that happen that now cause me to approach situations differently. And I think the one thing that pops into my mind in relation to this is acknowledging this is real and I don't want to be uncompassionate, but it feels overused.
Right.
So that's one of the things we're kind of struggling with and we need your help on is how do we have compassion when perhaps everything is trauma to everyone, then it's no longer trauma anymore.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
So how do you deal with this?
Well, and when it gets used in that way, what is that saying to the person that's been through something really, really horrible?
Right.
So I think, and not to say that these other things aren't horrible, but hopefully in context, we all know what we're talking about. Like there was an example that Matt gave before we got started here, Matt Cook, And I'm not going to say the example, but it was something that seems relatively small, and they're like, that was traumatic to me. And then if you have someone who grew up in just the worst home and they're looking at them like, what in the world? Yeah, we do want to be sensitive and not diminish people who've been through really hard things. Yeah, it's definitely a buzzword, one of those words that gets thrown around. And so I do want to spend a little bit of time defining it. And I was working with a trainer, and I had difficulty with that word because it does get used a lot. And a lot of the things that we reference as trauma would not be in the DSM defined as trauma. So the definition in that book is that there's like some serious risk of bodily harm and or sexual abuse, potentially even to the point of death. And so when you're defining that from a clinical diagnostic criteria, that would be in the realm of post-traumatic stress disorder. And so it's, some of the things that we talk about trauma, if you get into that book, maybe there are ways to make that work, but really that's talking about those big events that we're thinking about: car crashes, sexual abuse, near-death experiences, and things like that. In that training that I was working on with this supervisor on, I asked him about that because I was really having a tough time with that. And he said he likes to define it as situational versus developmental trauma. And the point that he was making is that our nervous systems are affected the same way. And so when we think about trauma, it's another definition that I've heard is when we experience something that overwhelms our ability to cope with it. Another thing that I heard just a few days ago, and I think this lady was actually saying, we overuse the term, but again, thinking about the developmental side of things, she said a long-term deprivation of not getting your needs met. Her name was Mary Bellafato. And so another clarification that I want to make as we're talking about this is, while I think a lot of people say, I've had this negative experience and therefore I need the world to change for me. And in no way am I saying that in this episode. I mean, there are certain realities in the world that may be set in stone. That's probably true. But we all have our own stories. And so I think sometimes people say, well, I've been through this thing, and so here's how I need you to interact with me. The other party gets a say in that. So I'm not saying that we need to change that behavior or how we're interacting with the people. But I guess I'll turn it over to you guys a little bit, but kind of to summarize where I am is there's episodic trauma where that's like those events that are horrible. There's developmental, which is like ongoing relationship struggles, not getting needs met. And these things are overwhelming my ability to cope, but I have to be in them anyway. And because of that, my nervous system is literally changed. And it affects the way I view things going forward. It affects the way my body responds going forward. And so that's kind of the layout that I want for the definition of trauma. And yeah, I'll throw it to you guys and see what thoughts you have.
So just to boil something down real quick.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure even I understand this.
Yeah.
I think that people typically associate trauma with a moment, right?
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, like a car crash or something
yes.
like that. But you're saying that can be traumatic.
Yes.
But there is also a form of trauma that is just a long running, right? A continuous, maybe this is too simplistic, like a paper cut type thing that just, something happens over and over and over, and it creates a traumatic experience or a reaction to a traumatic experience.
Yeah, I would clarify a little bit. So if you get into the diagnostic criteria again, there's what's called acute and there's what's called chronic. And so acute would be the car crash that happens one time, whereas chronic would be I'm living in a home where every night I get abused.
Right.
Which I definitely understand what you're saying about the paper cut. So I do get that. Definitely not a paper cut. But,
right.
But what about the child that is in their room and they go out of their room and their dad is passed out drunk every night?
That I wasn't specifically thinking of abuse. I'm thinking of that example or, just a child going day after day without being told, I love you by
That's right.
anybody.
That's right.
And then developing a sort of traumatic reaction to that.
That's exactly right.
And that's what I meant. That's why I'm saying paper cut, too simplistic.
No, I understand.
But not what we would maybe immediately associate with trauma.
That's right.
Can it be, just kind of to piggyback off of that, like what about like a diagnosis, like a chronic illness? Does that count? And I'm honestly asking, like, let's say somebody gets, a 5-year-old gets diagnosed with diabetes, like, is that something years later they look back on and you can call that trauma or no?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, my goodness, yes. How could it not be? I think is the question that I would ask.
Okay.
Because in that moment, there's this thing that happened that our nervous system's rocked. It overwhelms my ability to cope with it, but I have to be in that situation. My view of the world changes. My body reaction changes. I would say, how could that not be trauma? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, when we think about too, like we talked about this episodic developmental, you mentioned developmental meaning the needs haven't been met. And I think there's sometimes it's just in the environment that you're in could influence this. I'm thinking, and we talk in my communication classes about trying to relate to other people. And if you interact with someone, for example, that was alive during the Great Depression, talking about needs not being met, maybe they didn't have a lot growing up. That impacts the way they live even in the future. Like if you didn't have anything, then in the future, you're going to be probably more frugal. It impacts the way you live your life. You might not spend as freely, whatever it is, because you didn't have any money. Maybe it's a psychological thing. You didn't have anybody that told you they loved you. That's going to impact the way you approach relationships in the future because you might not be able to approach that relationship in the same way because your definition of love is different than someone else's. So I think, does that kind of developmentally, like
for sure,
as far as your needs not being met, that's kind of what my mind was going to.
For sure. And with developmental, any trauma, and we all do this. I mean, there's a thing called negative cognitions. And so it's like, what drives the way I view the world? So if there was a child who was not told, I love you at all, what might he or she internalize a message about himself?
I'm not worth being loved.
Yeah. I'm not worth it. I'm not lovable. I don't have value. And so this is the thing too. In the last episode I referenced, we want to just pray the anxiety away, or you're a Christian, you're not allowed to be depressed. But imagine this child that grew up in a home where they weren't told, I love you. It's not even I don't love you, but they don't hear the words I love you, or they're not held on a regular basis. And we could say, oh, that's not traumatic, but how could that not be traumatic? I mean, the child has to be in that environment, has to learn a way to adapt, and in doing that, has to start treating themselves like, oh, I'm not lovable.
What capacity then does that child have when they hear that God loves you, right?
Oh, my goodness.
To understand or realize that.
Yep, exactly. And I'm going to just pray that I'm not anxious anymore. Well, I've had 30 years of growing up with my brain getting wired this way, literally wired and connections in my brain. And then to say, okay, it's a sin to have anxiety. Well, so I'm going to pray that I'm healed of that. Is that not even asking for miraculous healing to some degree? I mean, you're asking for physical connections in the brain to change immediately. I would challenge us to think about life experiences totally affecting our nervous system in a way that causes us to change and interact in the world we're in.
So, Nathan, one of the things that we touched on just briefly before this episode is how trauma, to some degree, I feel like does get overused, right? And you mentioned at the beginning sort of an individual who has gone through trauma, hearing someone say they've had a traumatic experience and looking at them. I do feel like culturally, we're sort of at a point where individuals will say, or even if they don't say, will communicate basically like, you don't get to tell me what is traumatic to me.
Right.
Kind of a thing. Like you don't get to say what my capacity is to deal with something.
Right.
How does that work on the counseling side? I know there are clinical sort of diagnoses for these types of things, but how does that work when it does feel, at least outside looking in, like it can be a bit subjective?
And even I think that question is real, not even just from the counseling perspective, but as a minister, as a as a professor, as a, you're working as a administrator.
Sure,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, like all these different roles, and just a friend. Like we want to help our friends, or just like a social media friend who's like, oh, good grief, here they go again about their trauma.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm air quoting trauma right now, which you can't see. Like, yeah.
Well, and I'm not even saying it in the sense of like proving that someone, doesn't have something
Right.
that's trauma, but also just being empathetic to recognize and realize like, oh yeah, they are going through something.
It's a great question. That's probably the question that our viewers are sitting with. As a basic rule of thumb, I think I agree with you. Like, I think people do overuse it. I think people will name things as traumatic that probably are not, because it's gotten this, just used so much. Also, I have been in situations where something did not make sense to me. And in the back of my mind, I thought, what in the world? Come on. And then I hear the rest of the story. And so many times I've been like, oh, man, I missed that. So I think I would just say we have to be careful about making those judgments for someone else. And also, the world is not an easy place. And so if I'm constantly going around saying my trauma, and then I need you all to change and cater to that, then that's not the way the world works. I have a responsibility to work on my stuff. And so I don't want to be insensitive, but if I've been through trauma, I don't want to stay in a place of a victim. I want to learn to have empowerment and work through that. So
I think of the word resilience here.
Absolutely.
Like, we want to teach younger people. I want to teach my kids to be resilient and not, curl up in a ball every time things don't go the way you want them to.
Yeah.
And but I also want to be compassionate if it's actually trauma.
That's right. So I think the answer to that is, if I'm on the outside looking in, it's not necessarily my job to define what is or isn't trauma for someone. And if there's something in there that is, somebody tells me something and I'm like, no way, there's no way that's trauma, and I get angry, I need to look internally and go, what is it about that that's setting me off? Because there's something in my own story that I don't like about this. And so I would just encourage us all to look inwardly as much as possible with this, instead of necessarily outwardly.
Okay, so I have a question, and I don't even know that these things are connected. And so if you want to take a beat, I can explain it while you think through it. But we've talked a little bit about trauma generates a response within an individual. What then is the difference between like a fear and trauma? Are all fears traumatic? I wouldn't think so, but I don't know enough about it to know, because a fear does generate a response. And I mean, we can talk about fears, but
because fear generates that physical response the same way that trauma would, as far as I'm scared of something, my heart's going to race. So there is that physical component, just like a traumatic event would. So in those ways, they're similar, but there's probably some differences as well.
That's interesting. I have a fear of snakes. A time or two that I've run into them while weed eating, even back in my teenage years, boy, I lose my mind. But I've never had a traumatic experience with a snake.
That
I don't
you
have
remember.
that I remember. But I also kind of grew up, to be honest, scared of dogs. But I did have a traumatic experience or two.
Yeah, you
with
got
dogs.
we got bit by a dog. So
saw somebody get bit in a bad
So
way.
how old are you?
or watch the movie Cujo.
Nunya.
Okay.
He's in his
Early
40s.
to mid 40s, Nathan.
Come on, man. I'm 42 and I'm owning it. I am
44.
41.
I'm so
40.
I'm the old guy in the
young
group.
person.
Baby.
That's why I didn't want to answer. I'm the oldest guy in this
No,
podcast.
embrace it. I was
The most
telling my
with
daughter.
the most wisdom.
I was telling my daughter yesterday, I'm proud that I'm getting older. Like, that's what an honor and privilege. So I'm 42,
He's not traumatized by getting older.
Well, I mean, okay, so Matt mentioned dogs and snakes. Both, even snakes, you haven't had a bad interaction with, but you still have had interactions with them. I have a fear of chimps. have never encountered a chimp, right? Will likely never encounter a chimp, but like don't like to go into the chimp house at the zoo. We'll stay outside if that is an option. And have tried to think back through like, where did that come from?
Yeah.
And the youth group does know that Jared
And
is
the
afraid
youth
of
group
them, and
knows this.
they will take every opportunity
I
to.
love that.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it's like like even at Disney, like in Animal Kingdom, seeing larger primates around like the water rides. Like I had the thought of like, if one of these jumped into the boat, I know I can't beat it. It's stronger than I am, but like, am I strong enough to drown it? Like, what would I do in this kind of scenario?
He's thought it through.
Yeah, they're.
I mean,
they're tenacious. I can.
yeah.
I
They
think
can
I
eat
have
your face off.
new
huh?
fear.
Right? I mean, thank you. Y'all
Yeah.
get it. This is the most supportive these three have been to me on any episode of
No,
the
really, I'm just
Validating.
making fun of you. That's all. I'm just trying to,
fine.
I'm
I'm
trying
just
to
telling
provoke
you.
you into fear right now.
I won't. I know one's not here.
Yeah. Well, so the reason I asked Matt Cook the question is we look back on these things and we try to make sense of it. I'll speak for me, my 42-year-old mind, and I think back and go, well, it doesn't make sense logically. But there's something back there if it's an irrational fear where who knows what happened. I'm trying to think of an example where my daughters would be hanging out with their grandfather and he'd have the news on, and then my daughter comes home and she's like, Dad, is this going to happen? And I'm like, no, this is fine. And my point is, like, there's something that may have not been notable to remember, but if you were 3,
Right.
and somebody said something about those crazy chimps, or you saw a picture, or, who knows? I can't answer for what it is specifically because it's not in your conscious memory, but a fear of snakes, like it's healthy to be afraid of snakes. And maybe you interacted with someone who had an irrational fear of snakes, and every time they saw a snake, they had an overreaction. And so little Matt's like, yeah, those must be really scary.
Well, that's interesting. I started joining Facebook groups, snake identification Facebook groups, and I'm much better now. Like
Yeah.
now, like when I go at the golf course, I'm looking, like I want to see a snake so I can identify it.
Yeah.
And anyways, it's just funny how, like, I don't know why I was so afraid, but I've worked on that.
Yeah.
So it's a good question. Like, is it always associated with a trauma, or is it just...
So I would say no. Fears are not always associated with trauma. Fear is healthy, man. If I am walking in the Grand Canyon and I walk right up to the side and I don't have any fear, you know what? That's pretty reckless.
You have these kind of primal, like all kids to some degree are scared of the dark, right? I don't know that they've necessarily had a traumatic experience, all of them with the dark, but it's just one of those natural fears.
So, and I will give you an example though in my own story. I've shared this in Matt Barker's class, but when I was a kid, I went on a field trip. And we went in this cave, and I remember already being nervous because there was an elevator that took you down into the cave. And I remember already being nervous, and the elevator got stuck, and I lost my mind. 42-year-old Nathan can tell you, not that big a deal. Like, they just hit a button, and it went back to the top and reset. Then they made me get back on the elevator and do the tour because, poor parent volunteers that were supervising and they didn't know what to do. So I don't fault them for that, but like that probably wasn't the best decision in that moment. And so I had to ride this elevator again and go through the cave tour, terrified that I was going to get stuck in a cave the whole time because I already had been stuck. And now I've got to go do it again. It was 42-year-old Nathan can tell you it was safe, but second grade Nathan was traumatic. It was traumatic. And because of the way I perceived it, I thought I was stuck in a cave forever. And so for a long time, I had an irrational fear of getting stuck in small spaces. It was terrifying to me. I think a lot of people are nervous about small spaces, but I had this experience that like it elevated that. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I think sometimes you mentioned the word irrational. Sometimes we feel like I shouldn't be worried about this,
Right.
but I am worried about it. I mean, like me, I do not like riding on planes, right? And some of that could be when I was a sophomore in high school and I saw on the news, 9/11's happening, right? Whatever it is, there could be things that happen like, I don't want to be in a plane crash. Before that event, when I saw that on the news, I might not have really ever thought about a terrorist attack,
Yeah.
right? Because we didn't see it as much in the news.
Yeah.
So, or just maybe it's a fear of something that you've experienced and really didn't think about it too much until you were in that situation. I can't stand tight places. Like I can't ride roller coasters anymore. And I've never really had an experience like you had where I'm like stuck in a small, tight space. But as I've gotten older, like I can't have the bar of the roller coaster ride going down over my legs because I don't like I can't move. No idea why I feel that way. It's a fear that I will have to stop the ride. Like we're gonna have to stop it, guys. I gotta get off, and don't know why that is. It seems irrational, but to me, it's like a very real thing. I get very real reaction to it. So yeah, I don't know.
Well, go ahead, Matt.
Well, I was thinking of something that's very real and relevant to people who live in West Tennessee. Everybody has to deal with this at some level, and that's tornadoes.
Yep.
Right? There's a difference between, like, I think my kids who are a little fearful, rightly so, and I can think of some kids from church who had their house blown away by a tornado.
Right.
Like, that's a trauma. Like, I think that
For sure.
there's a trauma right there. Now, fortunately, they weren't in the house, right? But like, their house
lost
is
everything,
They lost
yeah.
everything. Like, there's a trauma, and so I imagine like when you have a tornado night, right? Like, there's some stuff they're dealing with that the average kid who fears tornadoes a little bit is facing.
It's more of a rational fear, like because they actually have had something that's happened that makes it more like it's not like a hypothetical. It's like no, we've had this experience that shows what damage it can do. Whereas the people that haven't had that damage, it seems more irrational because we've never had something that backs up what we're thinking. Not that anything's irrational; it just seems more irrational.
Yeah, I understand what you mean. But the likelihood of it happening again is like next to none. But they have had it happen. I mean, that was me in the elevator. I don't know if you guys have ever been stuck in an elevator. Like,
Yep. I have.
Yeah.
In this building.
Oh, well, that actually seems pretty
That's
likely.
pretty rational.
There's a 25% chance that that'll happen to you.
That's pretty common. I just take the stairs.
Yeah. But I mean, most likely we're not going to be stuck in an elevator. And the irrational has to do with the idea of, is this likely to happen again? I think is how I'm looking at it right now. But the reality is, if I've had something horrible happen, then, it feels rational. It feels like it could happen again. Yeah.
So with trauma, I imagine this could be like a multi-episode thing to even just begin to kind of understand it. But what are maybe some immediate takeaways or thoughts, like for the average listener who's listening to this? What are some immediate sort of things that maybe they should realize, or practical suggestions about this topic?
Okay. So for this, maybe, this might get too real, but whatever. I don't care. This is what I do. I would have an exercise, if you all would indulge me, and maybe the listeners can as well. So you guys open to that?
We don't know.
we don't know what's about to happen.
The invitation is just to close your eyes and put your hand on your heart. Actually, both hands on your heart. And so all of us middle-aged guys, we're all there. But all of us that are listening to this, I would just invite you to slow down, and that younger version of you that went through something really hard, whatever age that might be, I just want you to picture that person standing behind you. And again, I would invite you to have a specific situation in mind. So the age that you were when that occurred. And I want you to picture that younger version of you trying to get your attention. And I wonder how that person is trying to do that. I wonder physically what they're doing. I wonder what they're saying. And in your mind, I would invite you to turn around and make eye contact. And then I would invite you to tell them what they needed to hear in that moment, the thing that could have brought them comfort. And in your mind, I'd like you to switch places with that person. And you're now looking up at the older version of you, and they're saying those words. And I just want you to breathe the words in. Just take a deep breath. And then we can switch back. Then I invite you to gently open your eyes. And your question was, what practical advice? I would invite all of us to spend more time with the younger wounded parts of ourselves. So we all needed that person. We all needed those words. And so that's my practical advice.
It's good.
Yeah. I don't know if this is the same question. Let's say that the listeners realize that there is a trauma in their life. After thinking through this, maybe they just hadn't processed it, or maybe the time or two they're like, I got that thing back there. But you realize, man, that thing probably is impacting my life right now and the way I deal with things.
Yeah.
Like, what do I do if that's the case? Beyond, a simple, that's a very helpful exercise.
Right.
Like, at what point do I realize I need to go talk to somebody?
Yeah.
How do we deal with it when you realize maybe there's some stuff back there I need to deal with?
Yeah. I think if you found that exercise to be more touching than you expected, there's probably some stuff in there that's stuffed down. I mean, and that exercise can be touching anyway, but if you've never unpacked that with a professional, I mean, my answer would be, if you don't have a counselor and never had a counselor, you need to get a counselor. Everybody needs that experience. And if you get in with a skilled counselor, they're going to see some things that you haven't seen. I think a lot of us have a tendency to just push through and stuff it down, and that works good enough. But yeah, to answer your question, I don't see what downside there would be to getting in with a professional, especially if you've got some of those things that are pretty big.
Yeah, and I think maybe addressing our own issues can help us relate to others that might be going through it. If we're not really unpacking the baggage that we have, then we're not able to recognize maybe other people when they're dealing with things, and maybe we're not as empathetic to it because we just kind of push it down. We think maybe others should as well. So, I think that probably, whether you're seeing a counselor or just, reflecting on things that happened in your life, it helps you in your interactions with other people as well, I would think. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah.
Anybody else got anything else? All right. Well, thanks for joining us for today's episode of Navigating the Four. We hope today's conversation sparked something real in your faith, your healing, your leadership, or your communication. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe, share it with a friend, and leave us a review. Until next time, keep showing up, keep growing, and keep navigating the four. We'll see you next time on Navigating the Four podcast.